I'm definitely having sort of building a shelf of things that feel informative in different ways. Things where when I read it through, I think, oh, that's good. Can I use that technique here? Which is a really fun bit to do, actually, thinking about different puzzles with the book and thinking back to what I've read that I maybe want to reread that would be informative there, or searching around and seeing if there's anything new that I want to do. And like, who else has written stuff in contexts that might be inspirational or informative there.
That's such an interesting way to go about it. I love the idea of building a shelf.
It's also it's a great reason to go and buy copies of some books that you read ages ago and don't have but really like. You're like, oh no, I need this to go on my shelf for the next book. It's very useful. It's an important purchase.
Hello, and welcome to So I Wrote a Book, Now What? Where writers chat about writing. My guest today is Holly Gramazio, author of The Husband. This was one of my very favorite books that I read last year, and next week it comes out in paperback. If you have not read it, now is the time. It's so good. It's about a woman that she goes up into her attic and out pops a husband, and then another, and then another, and then another. It's amazing. We have a really great conversation on this episode about her writing process. I'm so excited to share it with you. Let's just get right into it. Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So what made you decide to write a book?
I think I had always assumed that I would eventually write a book. Like maybe I would wake up one morning and it would turn out that I had written a book already. And
You didn't know?
Yeah. And, time continued to pass and I had never kind of accidentally written a book without realizing it. So I eventually figured, probably time to sit down and give it a go, see how that works out, give it a proper attempt.
Yeah. So when you sat down to write, did you just start it on your laptop, or did you have a set goal?
I think I was initially just kind of playing around with the idea and seeing where it went. Yeah, and sat down with my laptop, but mostly at a little cafe that was around the corner. I'd go there for an hour or so in the morning and just try and write away before all of my actual proper work stuff and see how that went on. And, write 800 words, 1,000 words usually. Not necessarily in order. I didn't really have an ending for the book. I didn't really have a kind of route that I knew it was going to take. I had the setup and I had a few moments that I knew I was interested in hitting. And other than that, it was very kind of exploratory.
Was The Husbands the first book you ever attempted?
Oh, I mean, I wrote a lot of terrible novels as a teenager. I assume terrible. I mean, I don't have them anymore, but from what I can remember, I wouldn't. It's kind of a relief that they're not there to sort of go back to and look at and go, oh no. Before, other than that, pretty much, I guess a few years earlier, I had sort of sat down and tried to sort of knock away at a different idea and got about 15,000 words in, but it wasn't really taking, and it kind of fell by the wayside.
So when you were writing and you wrote kind of like 800 here, 1,000 here, how did it then take the shape of a novel, especially if you were doing it kind of out of order?
Yeah, totally out of order. I did try doing the thing that I'd read about somewhere where you stop in the middle of a sentence to kind of give you the oomph to come back to it the next day, which actually worked really well for me. But when I finished a chapter, I would try not to stop for the day. I'd try to start another bit, but it wasn't necessarily the next one. I would just, have an idea for a thing that could happen or for a husband and launch off on that and sort of see where that went. And so after quite a lot of doing that, I had way too much. I had maybe 150,000 words of stuff. The finished book is about 100. and kind of sat down with this extremely disordered mess, which also didn't have an ending at that point, and kind of tried to start shaping it, if that makes sense. Yeah, you hear people talk about like plotting and pantsing, and occasionally you hear people talk about a different third thing that is maybe like patchwork, right? It's like you've made all of these little bits and pieces, cut them all out, so made these shapes, and now you have to kind of see if you can fit them together, what you're missing, what you've got too much of, see if you can make a thing out of it. I can't sew, so I don't know if that analogy works at all.
I think it does. It makes sense. So once you had it kind of put together, did you start showing it to people then, or did you start showing it? Did you get readers before it was a thing?
Sort of, yeah. So once I'd done all of the sort of initial writing-y stuff mostly in 2020. I was in Adelaide at the time, which had a very different sort of COVID situation due to some very early lockdowns. So that's why I was able to go around the corner to the cafe and write there in the mornings. And at the end of 2020, I had this huge pile of stuff and I kind of set it aside. I didn't really think about it much over 2021. And then I came back to it thinking I should really try to pull this together, see if there's anything in here. And to kind of kick that off, I enrolled in a kind of little 10-week write your novel course, which was an online course. It was sort of on Zoom. It was 2 hours a week and there were 10 people in it. And the way it worked basically was that 2 people each week would send in 5,000 words. Everyone else would read it, and you'd sit there and listen to everyone talk about the 5,000 words and not really say anything and see whether that was useful. And it was terrifying to do, but I pulled together the first 5,000 words, and then 5 weeks later, the next 5,000 words, trying to sort of piece that together in a way that would make sense. Sent it off the first time and sort of felt physically ill for a while after I'd sent it off. It was the first time anyone had read any of it other than me. And yeah, it was a really lovely, supportive class. It was run by a writer called Rowan Haseo Buchanan, who's written some very lovely novels. And people were lovely and supportive and liked some of the jokes and were confused about some other stuff. And it really helped to energize me to go to it and try and pull the rest of it into shape after that. So I kind of knuckled down and tried to make that be a thing that made sense, and eventually sent a copy to a couple of friends to read, which was also terrifying, but not quite as terrifying as the initial 5,000 words. I'd also, during this stage, started reading a chapter a night aloud to my actual husband, who has this great quality, which is he's extremely bad at hiding his emotions. So if you read a chapter aloud to him and he gets bored, or a joke doesn't work, or a joke does work really well, you can absolutely trust that, because he cannot hide that from his face at all. So he was an incredible sort of first listener. So by the time I sent it off to a couple of friends, he had heard all of it as well. And then, yeah, got some feedback from them, did a little bit more polishing, a little bit more sort of changing-y stuff here and there. Tried to cut it down a little bit because I knew it was too long. At this point, it was still maybe 120,000 words long, something like that. And then eventually sent the first 3 chapters off to my agent with my fingers crossed. And then as soon as I'd sent it, went, oh, I should change this, I should change that, I should change the other. This is why people recommend, like, after you think you're done, leaving it to sit for a couple of months and going back, right? Which is great advice, but advice I was incapable of following. I needed to use the momentum, and so then I started frantically changing stuff here and tweaking stuff there. And when she wrote back saying, could you please send me the whole thing, I was like, yes. And Googling, like, what's the longest pause that okay between an agent saying, hello, please send me the whole thing, and you doing it. Like,
I have Googled that.
Right? Okay, it's Thursday. Can I get away with Monday? Probably I can get away with Monday, but like no further than that without it
Right.
looking a bit weird. So just frantically realizing all of this stuff that maybe I had have realized anyway if I'd managed to sort of sit on it for 3 months before sending it over to her.
But she liked it.
She did. I was in a quite fortunate position agent-wise in that technically she was kind of sort of already my agent.
Nice.
My work other than writing is in game design and games writing and curating game events. And
I have to say that makes so much sense with the novel. Like once I looked in, because I loved the book, and then I went on this deep dive, and I was like, "What does she do?" And I was like, "Oh, game design. That makes so much sense."
Yeah, it's definitely drew a lot on that for the writing process, I think. And yeah, several years before that, a children's publisher had got in contact with me and my friend Sophie Sampson to say, hey, we read about this drawing game you made. It's sort of a collaborative drawing game for people to play together. It's a card game. Do you think you could do a book version of that? And we said, yeah, I think so. That sounds great. The sort of one writer we know introduced us to her agent, who liked the idea as well and said, oh, I can represent you in this discussion if you want. Because obviously if you've got a publisher that's already interested in the book, then the whole getting an agent thing becomes much easier. But actually that never came to anything. In the end, the book of the card game, there wasn't a version of it that both satisfied what we wanted to do with the game design and what they thought would work as a book and was, producible and affordable to print and all of that kind of thing. So that sort of fell by the wayside. But he had signed a contract. So I sent this email years later, basically going, hello, not sure if you remember me. I guess technically you're kind of my agent. I'm
Paper.
hoping you feel obliged by politeness to read the first 3 chapters of the novel you will be horrified to learn I've written. I attach them herewith. And yeah, thankfully she did.
That's amazing. And that's also amazing that she repped children's books and adult, because that doesn't always happen either.
Really lucky there that she was a very good match for both of those concepts.
Yeah. Did your beginning change from when you sent it to her to the book that is now?
No. I'm nothing major, some sort of edits and tweaks and things, but pretty much right from the start, the beginning has been very, very similar. For people who haven't read it, it's a book about a woman whose attic starts creating an infinite supply of husbands. It's a comedy. One husband at a time. One guy goes up, different guy comes down. Her life changes a little bit. And she discovers this has happened when she comes home late one night, drunk from a friend's hen party, bachelorette party, and finds her husband waiting up for her. And she's, I'm not married. What's going on here? And everything sort of spirals from there. And I knew that this was quite a weird concept and that not everyone would be on board for it. So I basically wanted to get into it as quickly as possible. I wanted the reader to be finding out about it as the character found out about it. But I wanted it to happen really, really fast so that if people were on board for it, great, they know what they're in for. If they don't feel like reading that sort of book, then, the first chapter tells them that. So, yeah, the very quite fast-moving, sort of immediate start there was very much just a sort of a way of saying, hey, this is what we've got. If you fancy it, great, come on board. If you don't, that's fine. Didn't want to trick anyone into reading it.
Right. When you started the book, and you kind of moved around scenes, when you started the book, did you start at the beginning when you wrote it? Or did that come later?
I do not remember that, but I think I probably did. I think probably like first scene, maybe the first chapter or so, sort of first husband, but not many details about him, and then just began inventing new husbands and writing chapters about them.
That's so fun. Did you stick to kind of a routine when you wrote it? Like, so it sounds like there was not a routine of like what scene you were gonna do, but like same time of day or like same
Yeah.
frame of mind.
Yeah, so for that, I would get up and try and make it be sort of the first thing I did that day. I'd taken to charging my phone in a different room, which turned out to be a good thing. So I would try not to sort of look at the internet first and just go out, sort of walk around the corner, have a coffee, sit and write for 45 minutes or an hour, or if it was going either really well or really badly, maybe an hour and a half, and then head back home.
What program do you prefer to use when you draft?
Oh, I am I move stuff around a lot. So I'll write things in a lot of different programs, almost as if I'm tricking myself into doing it. Like maybe I've been spending so much time in Word that I look at it and I'm like, no, not that. And then I'll write in sort of Google Docs for a while, or I'll write in an email to myself sometimes. Or when I started pulling it sort of together and trying to make it be a coherent thing, I pasted everything that I had into a big Scrivener document. And then for the redrafting, I worked mostly in Scrivener. And then obviously once it was sent off to editors working with them were in Word with all of the sort of track changes and that kind of thing. But yeah, I often trick myself into it by using, 4 or 5 different programs for a single
How do
project.
you keep the thread? Like, how do you know where to get what? Like if it's in Google Docs and email and Word, how do you
Well,
know
this is
when?
part of what only works perhaps if you're either very diligent about always writing in order, which I'm not, or you just write in a very chaotic, a little bit here, a little bit there sort of mode where wherever you write it, whatever I'd written it in, once I got around to trying to shape it into something coherent, I was going to have a load of weird files. I was going to have like 4 different versions of one scene and no versions of another. So it didn't really hurt. Also, I quite like reading my own writing, which sometimes I wonder whether that's a shameful thing to admit, because you do get people saying, "Oh, I can't bear to read it," and that always sounds very dignified to me. But I'm like, "Oh no, I'm enjoying this. I like reading stuff and tweaking a sentence here and there and sort of just gradually smoothing things over." So I would paste things in and from one program and read them through and make some little changes, and then paste another thing in from somewhere else and go, oh, maybe this goes before that. Let's put it there and see how that goes. And I started doing spreadsheets as well.
Oh, spreadsheets. Because I was like, do you just remember? Like, I put that there. But so you keep track of it kind of on a spreadsheet?
Yeah. Mostly I just sort of remember-ish and then check, because I'm very much a rewriter. So by the time I said it to anyone, I'd gone through it so many times. But also in the sort of final-ish, trying to get it all to make sense, I had a spreadsheet, especially for when in the year it was, sort of what month, when the husbands change very rapidly, what day of the week, when they stay around for longer, sort of what month is it? Partly because one of the things that I was doing to kind of keep a sense of time passing, because I've got some things in common with time loop stories in terms of the world resetting, but it's not a time loop story. She doesn't go back to the beginning of the first day. Time is still moving on, kind of without her. So I wanted to have that sense of the world going on, and part of the way to do that, I thought, was just looking at the natural world around her. So I had to know whether things happening in April or August, so I would know sort of what plants are in flower, that kind of
Right.
thing.
I think that was very effective because it
Oh, thank
definitely did
you.
feel like time passing. And also, it seems like the other relationships outside of her kept progressing, like they kept progressing in their lives, yet she was still like stuck with her
Yeah,
husband.
yeah.
I liked that a lot. Um, so you set it aside for like a year. Do you feel
Yeah,
like
about that.
that space gave you perspective on the scenes when you went back to them?
Oh, yeah, I think absolutely. But I was still very, like I was reluctant to cut whole scenes. I would try and
Mm,
optimize scenes a lot. I would try and take words out and sentences out. And there were some that just weren't useful at all. Or sometimes there'd be, 3 or 4 scenes that were serving the same purpose. But yeah, I was very like I wrote them because I liked them and I thought they'd be fun or funny or do something, and I'd go back and be like, oh no, I don't want to lose that. I'll just try and make everything a little bit shorter before I sent it off. Before I did some revisions after talking to my agent and got it down to about 115,000 maybe, and then no, maybe I got it down to 115 before I sent it to her, and then to 105 before it went to my editors. I can't remember, but there were a couple of big edit points where it went down to 115, down to 105, down to 100. And for those, I did end up cutting some scenes, which if I look back on now, I'm like, yeah, I didn't need those scenes. That's fine. It's fine without it. If I went back now, I could probably claw another 2 or 3K out of it, I reckon, get it down to like 97. But yeah, a little bit of distance helps.
Does it ever feel done to you? Was there ever a point of the book where you're like, this is it, this is done?
I love external deadlines. I find them so useful. I find it very difficult to finish things without them. So, having to send the whole manuscript through to my agent, for example, having to send the first 10,000 words to that class, having getting an edit letter from my editors and knowing when they needed it by, which I was working away at until like 2:30 in the morning on the day that I said I'd send it to them. And like, yeah, 2:30 on Wednesday is technically still Tuesday, right? It's fine. It's fine. And then beyond that point, it did feel a bit. I've done what I can. Had line edits after that as well, which was good because even just psychologically, it's like, no, it's not too late. There's still a chance to tweak things. But by the time it got to proofreading and copy edits and so on, even I, who have just said I mostly quite like reading my own writing, was like, oh my God, this book, I hope I never have to look at this grotesque thing again. I'm so sick of it. And at that point, it's like, yeah, if it's not done, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah. Are you working on something new now?
I am. It's still pretty early stages. I'm in the sort of making a load of little bits of patchwork stage. I kind of hoped that having written one book, I would come to write another book with a sort of new ability to start at the beginning and write through to the end. Not necessarily to have planned the whole thing, but at least to kind of write it in order and have that sense of forward progress. But that doesn't really seem to be the case. And when I try to do it, I find it very hard to get anything written. So I think I just have to allow myself to be a bit of a patchworker. It's, like I said, it's quite early stages, so it's a bit nebulous, but it's another comedy like The Husbands. It doesn't have a magic thing in it like The Husbands' Magic Attic, but it is, like The Husbands, a bit odd. And it's set in a zoo.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah, I'm having a really good time with it. Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. Yeah, there was another writer and she told me that I think you have to hate writing a little bit or you're not doing it right.
Yeah, I've also heard everyone kind of hates writing their second book, and
Mm,
it can take you 10 years or it can take you a year, but either way, you'll hate it for the whole thing. So you might as well just try and get through it as quickly as you
yeah, just
can. And
do
then you
it.
can write your third book, which might be fun.
Hopefully. Was the first one fun to write?
Yeah, I think so. Um, I liked the little ritual of it. I liked inventing all of these characters. I liked sort of figuring out how you write a novel. I spent a lot of it going, this can't be how you're meant to do it. Like, there must be people who write novels repeatedly must have some sort of system that they're just not telling the rest of us about. The idea that you just sit down and make up some people and you don't even really know what they're like, but then you kind of figure it out slowly. Like, that seems ridiculous. But
It really does.
yeah, but it turns out that's kind of the way of it for a lot of writers.
Yeah, it's bananas. I don't know that there is another way.
Mm.
You just gotta write them to know them. Is the challenge of the second book partly like the pressure from the first book?
I guess so. And knowing that some readers will come to it because they've read The Husbands and liked it, and like, you don't want to disappoint anyone, right? But also it's going to be a different book and doing slightly different things, and you kind of have to be honest to what it is and what it's about. And so trying to put that out of mind and just go, oh, what would be fun to write now? What could happen now? How might this work? And not think too much about who will read it or
Right.
how would it be marketed. I think those are all really sensible things to think about when you're choosing what book to write, especially if you have multiple different ideas that you'd be keen on thinking about. I do not think there is anything wrong at all in going, well, which of these is most marketable? Which of these is something that the readers I know are enthusiastic to read something else by me might be interested in, right? You can't pretend that you're existing in a vacuum of art. But I think, at least for me, once I've picked, that I do kind of need to pretend I'm existing in a vacuum of art and just go, oh, what might be funny to happen? Like, what do I feel like writing, and see how it goes.
Yeah. I was so curious because I have some ideas in my head for like kind of a speculative fiction, which is kind of The Husbands is a little bit speculative fiction. But then I was like, but what if I don't have any more ideas for speculative fiction? Like if you write one, is that what you have to write for the rest of it? So it's really nice to hear that yours is going to be like comedy and in the same voice and vein, but not speculative fiction.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I don't think, if you write two things that are radically different, you can always use a pen name for one of them, right?
True.
But yeah, I don't think people who enjoyed The Husbands, for example, largely enjoyed it in a way that was like, I must have a magic hook or I'm not in, right? I think this is a fun concept that drives a story. They enjoyed the characters or the writing or the ideas or whatever it is about it. That you can't keep everything the same.
Yeah. In your writing practice, have you ever felt stuck?
Oh, yeah. But mostly not in the sort of staring at a blank page kind of way, more in the, oh no, I've frittered away another day, like reading the internet kind of way. So I'm very easily distractible, very procrastinatory. So I feel, when I feel stuck, it tends to be in a kind of, oh, how have I spent this whole week not doing anything. What's happened? What did I do instead? And I'm like, well, I baked a cake. I rearranged a bookshelf. I read a whole lot of like essays on the internet on a subject that is not relevant to my book at all. And that sort of thing, rather than, I sat and stared at a page for 8 hours and couldn't get anything to come out. Once I successfully make myself sit down and try to start, I can usually do something or other, even if it's not necessarily something that ends up being useful. Might be something that I cut out at the end, but it's still sort of keeping the story moving in my head.
When you were learning to piece all the patchworks together and you took that class, were there books as well that you turned to, like either craft books or books you read, fiction, just for like inspiration and it's like, this is the vibe?
Yeah. Interesting. I do love reading craft books. I really like, the recent-ish, 5 to 10 years old, like George Saunders ones, Pond in the Rain. I really like Samuel R. Delaney's About Writing, for example. But I tend to not be aware of anything that is immediately applicable. It's extremely rare that I read something and I think, oh, I can use that. For me, I've got to hope and assume that at some level it's sort of bedding in and is influencing me, even if not consciously. But for me, it's more about seeing people be excited about writing and have smart thoughts about it that makes me get excited about writing as well, and makes it easier to sort of sit down and get on with some. I did have a kind of pile of books that felt informative in various ways for different aspects of the husbands, which is kind of behind me. So I'll see how many of them are actually in there at the minute. Yeah, I think it's missing a few, but so I was interested in books that have this sort of one weird thing at the heart of them and sort of take that for granted and get to that quite early on, and then you just go from there. And so things like Andrea Lawler's Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl was very good for that. Zen Cho's Blackwater Sister was also very good for that. So Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl has a character who can sort of transform their body at will into sort of different shapes, different genders, sort of gradually as a sort of a result of mental effort. Blackwater Sister is a woman who is haunted by the ghost of her own grandmother, but sort of, more internally than there's a ghost wandering around, like it's a voice in her head. I looked at a lot of travelogues because there's something kind of travelogue-y about sort of husbands for me and the way it's structured, because although you are mostly in the same apartment all the way along. Sorry, my kitten has just come in and is yelling at
so
me.
Cute.
But, momentarily distracted here. Come on, Madeline. Stop yelling. Where was I? Yeah, although that they're in the same flat for most of it, you get a lot of people coming in, people leaving, maybe returning a little bit further on. You get one main character and her sort of journey through it, driving that. And it reminded me a lot of travel books where you have someone kind of going on this through these scenes of different people and different things going on and how those are structured. So people have mentioned The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to me quite a lot, but I would say
interesting because I never put that together.
Yeah.
I read it when I was little.
I did love it. I loved all the Narnia books, but my favourite was The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is the one where they go on a long journey through a bunch of islands and kind of meet people there. Sometimes people come back, all of that kind of stuff. So that was really interesting and useful to me to think about structure. And Langston Hughes, I Wonder as I Wander, which is his autobiography of his time in the sort of 1930s, traveling across Europe and a lot of Asia as well. And it's got the same kind of very forward drive and sense of cohesion to the whole, even as he moves from place to place and brings in a load of different characters. I thought about when I was thinking about how to have time passing, and decided that something from the sort of natural world would do it. That was because I was rereading a couple of books by Ellen Montgomery, who wrote Anne of Green Gables most famously, and next most famously, Emily of New Moon. But I was rereading a couple of my old favourites, which were The Story Girl and The Golden Road, which are like her fourth most famous series or whatever it might be. They're quite minor hits in the bibliography, but it is just about this sort of family of children hanging out kind of at the point where childhood turns into what we'd now call young adulthood, and the sense of joy in being together and awareness of the fact that that's going to change soon. And it does that so beautifully with a lot of little sort of natural world details. So I was rereading that and was like, oh yeah, great. I can use that. Thanks, Lucy Maud. Brilliant. Yeah, I also looked quite a bit at for voice. I wanted it to sort of feel fun to be with, even when it was stressful. So I looked at Nora Ephron's Heartburn as basically everyone who's tried to write a funny book that's all about relationships in the last 40 years has done. I looked at Laurie Colwin's Happy All the Time, and I looked at quite a lot of Christopher Isherwood, like minor Christopher Isherwood, who I love, who has written a lot of stuff, but in the 20s and 30s wrote a lot of sort of not quite autobiographical things, sort of slightly reimagined versions of his life. Sometimes the main character is called Christopher Isherwood, and it is or isn't him in various ways. But he has a tone that is very good at describing people's physical behavior as a way to give the reader access to how they're feeling, if that makes sense. So the narrator will look at someone and tell you about a little thing they do, a little fiddle they have with their fingers or whatever it might be, and then you as a reader sort of through that see how the character is feeling, which is not an unusual thing to do, but he does it so well. And I really love a lot of things about his work, and so I looked at it to see whether there's anything out there I could do about my viewpoint character, who isn't always very good at knowing herself, and whether I can kind of sort of steal from Isherwood to have these physical descriptions of feelings in her body and actions that she takes that allow the reader access to information about how she's feeling, even if she's not always totally conscious of that. So I don't know how much any of that comes across in it, but it was great to have this sort of pile there to kind of look at all of these books and see what people had done. And
about that too when I read the book, because it's so hard to write a character that doesn't know themselves, and yet write it vulnerable enough that the reader is there for it, like I'm going to go with this person on their journey of finding who they are, while they're learning who they are. Like it's done really well, and that makes a lot of sense that you used some of those things, but you used them so well I didn't know you did it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. When you think about all of these things, like the forward momentum and using the natural setting, and did that come like kind of piece by piece as you were putting the scenes together? Did it come like later in the revising stage? Or was that something you did while you were drafting? It was something you were thinking about?
I think it was mostly something I started thinking about as I was sort of putting it all together. Voice, obviously, I thought about a little bit earlier on. So I was thinking about the sort of Isherwood references, and some of the sort of voice inspirations early on. But things about structure definitely came later on, and things about how do writers get people to buy into their sort of high concept, weird magic thing and keep the story moving, and like do that fast and efficiently and in a way where you want to sort of stick with it.
Yeah. I went into The Husband's blind. I didn't read the blurb, so I didn't know. I was like, yeah, I've heard that this is great. I'm going to read it. And then when it first happened, I was like, what? I put it down there. I had to tell my husband. I was like, you have to hear about this. But then I couldn't put it down. So it's definitely like propulsive. And I did really clock that, oh, we're not going to stop and talk about this. It's just going to go. Okay. I thought that was a great way to do it. Because if we had like stopped and hemmed and hawed, then maybe I would have had more questions about it or questioned it more. But I didn't, because we just kept going.
Yeah, I did a big sort of list of a lot of books and television shows and movies that I like that also have this kind of thing that people have to sort of buy into in this kind of way. And sort of this big chart of what is it? What's the weird thing that happens? How does it end? Do we find out an explanation for the weird thing? If we do, are we glad that we found out an explanation for the weird thing? And I looked at that when I was thinking about sort of how to end it and how to tie it all in together. And almost always, if there was an explanation, it didn't feel like it had added much for me personally. I know that's a matter of taste and different people like different things here, but I'm kind of, if I'm on board with the idea, then I am, and I don't need a little explainy bit. With some exceptions. So, for example, in like Palm Springs, the sort of time loop movie kind of explains its time loop, but that's because it's partly about the concept of time loop movies, right? That's a movie that only makes sense if you're familiar with Groundhog Day and Russian Doll and all of the other existing. And in that context, it's a specific type of joke to have this sort of explanation and way of dealing with the time loop. But for me, for this book, I ended up going, yeah, I just want to get people into it, and then we're not going to stop to dwell on it too much.
Right.
I need to know what the rules are for myself, and I need to give the character time to sort of explore the rules and discover things about the world, because obviously you would be curious about this. You'd want to poke at the edges of your magic attic and why it works like that, right? But I don't need to stop and go, here is a full explanation of exactly what the rules are and how it works and why it happened.
Yeah. Reedsy has a great video about when the mystery is so great that the explanation falls flat. And of course it cites Lost as one of the examples. But it's so true, because once you have this like magical thing that's so intriguing, there's not a lot of explanations that's going to satisfy everybody. I mean, I doubt there's any explanation that'll satisfy everybody.
Yeah. I will say there are a couple of books that are weird but kind of have an explanation for the thing that I think work incredibly well. I think Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, which you start reading going, oh, it's a vibes book, fine, I've got this atmosphere and this weird thing, and then as you go on, you're like, oh wait, no, there's a logic and there's a plot, there's an explanation, and there's also a book called The Invention of Morel, which is a sort of which is kind of a 1930s, I think, book by Cazares, I might be pronouncing that wrong, which has someone on an island witnessing a very weird thing going on. And again, I started reading it going like, oh yes, a vibes book, great. Just a weird thing is going on and this character is hanging out with it. There's not much story. There's not an explanation. It's just fine. And then, 2/3 of the way through, there's a bunch of plot and an explanation. And I say, oh my God, incredible. Love it. So I don't think it's worse to explain things necessarily, but I don't think what I was trying to do with The Husband would have been served by a little explanation or a little bit of this is exactly how it works.
Right. So for your current book, are you doing a lot of research in the same kind of vein where you're like finding bits and pieces from places?
Yeah, I'm definitely having sort of building a shelf of things that feel informative in different ways. Things where when I read it through, I think, oh, that's good. Can I use that technique here? Which is a really fun bit to do, actually, thinking about different puzzles with the book and thinking back to what I've read that I maybe want to reread that would be informative there, or searching around and seeing if there's anything new that I want to do. And like, who else has written stuff in contexts that might be inspirational or informative there.
That's such an interesting way to go about it. I love the idea of building a shelf. Usually I just build a Pinterest board. I don't have a digital shelf.
It's also it's a great reason to go and buy copies of some books that you read ages ago and don't have but really like. You're like, oh no, I need this to go on my shelf for the next book. It's very useful. It's an important.
Do you save your shelf then? Because you got all those books off that shelf. Are you going to save it and that will be your husband's shelf and your next book will be?
Maybe. Like, I do like having the husband's books kind of clustered together. Like, it feels nice to look at them and remember the writers who taught me how to do different stuff that I was like, yeah, I can never go at that about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very cool way to do it. I like that. Now I need another bookshelf too.
The perpetual problem.
I don't know if I even want to ask that because it's such a wonderful one. But maybe I'll ask, and if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But
okay.
What was the submission process like for you? I have heard many things from different writers on like it went really quick or like it was the worst time of my life.
Yeah, I had a pretty good run of it. Honestly, it went pretty quick. It went on submission when I was back in Australia visiting my family. So I was on a totally different time zone because it went on sub initially in sort of UK. And yeah, I got a phone call from my agent at 10:30 at night after I'd been in a nice Melbourne pub drinking $6.50 Aperol spritzers all night with a bunch of Australian friends that I hadn't seen for years. And her going like, oh, hey, we've had such and such an offer from Germany that I think we should accept. And it's sold in Germany before it's sold in the UK. And I didn't even know that was a thing that could happen. So I was very confused, not sober, standing in a corner of this pub going, okay, great, I guess. And then sort of getting the tram back home to friends that were staying with after, thinking, did that happen? Is that a real thing? Have I hallucinated that? And then getting another call from her next morning, slightly hungover due to the acts of the previous evening and the inevitable comeuppance, going, oh, here's an offer that we have had from a UK publisher that I think probably we should take. Here's who the editor is, here's what's going on. And me going like, yeah, sure, great. And also staying with friends who had just recently moved house. So I was in their living room, which was totally empty. It's a very surreal experience. Wow. And I did spend several days genuinely wondering if I was having some sort of weird, like, making this up. Like, I'd read so many posts about how onerous selling a book tends to be that I was thinking probably more people have some sort of weird delusion about this happening than it actually happens to this quickly and weirdly. Which I now know, now that I've talked to more writers, I know is not the case. Quite often things will happen weirdly quickly just because there's a confluence of things happening at a particular time. Sometimes things take forever. Sometimes things move fast. And yes, spent several days going, I really hope I'm not imagining this, but genuinely worrying that maybe I was before I finally had stuff in emails to refer to. It was like, okay, great. I can look at it there. Probably I'm not making it up.
I'm glad to hear it went quick. 'Cause
Oh,
honestly, it's such a wonderful book that if you had a really hard time on sub, I was going to be really disheartened. It's going to be like, I can't. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of this. It's so fascinating to hear about your writing process, and I can't wait to read your next book. So
thank you so much for having me. This has been such a lovely
excited.
chat.
Do you have anything else you want to share?
I don't think so. No, I think that's everything I could possibly think
Yeah,
about.
I asked you a lot.
About writing.
Well, I'll link all of your stuff, like your social media, and
Oh,
I love
brilliant.
reading your
Thank you.
newsletters. I just read the one with your stacks of debuts. I liked the breakdown. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
It was so nice to talk with Holly about her writing process, and it was really honestly a breath of fresh air to find someone who has been successful writing a book that did not follow a prescribed like beat sheet and didn't have a set, like, she used multiple programs, she emailed herself. I just find it inspiring that she found her own way to do it, and she wrote very much her own book, and it's a massive success. I find a lot of inspiration in that, and I hope you did too. Yeah, see you next time.